At 16, my father dragged me by my arm into a freezing thunderstorm and told me to get out of his house because he did not need a sick daughter. That night, I walked 3 miles in the pouring rain because of a vicious lie my golden child sister told to save her own skin. 5 hours later, the police showed up at his front door and the color completely drained from his face. But that night was only the prologue. 19 years later, the ultimate betrayal unfolded under the crystal chandeliers of the Oakwood Estate Country Club. I am Naomi, 35 years old, and tonight I am sitting at table number 4 at my father Terrence's lavish 65th birthday and retirement gala. The room was packed with 200 of Atlanta's most influential people. Jazz music floated through the air, blending with the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of expensive networking. I was wearing a tailored emerald green suit, sipping sparkling water and watching the family that threw me away pretend they were the picture of perfection. Then the jazz band stopped. My younger sister, Jasmine, tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal flute. The sharp ringing echoed through the massive ballroom. She stood at the center of the stage, glowing in a custom silk gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her husband Jamal stood proudly beside her, beaming like he had won the lottery. Jasmine leaned into the microphone, flashing that perfect practice smile that always got her exactly what she wanted. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate the patriarch of our family," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "And a special thank you to my older sister Naomi. She is sitting right over there." 200 pairs of eyes shifted to me. I did not blink. I just watched her. Jasmine continued, her smile widening into a smirk. "Let us all give Naomi a massive round of applause. She has so generously offered to cover tonight's $45,000 catering bill. Since she is single and has absolutely nothing else to spend her money on, she insisted on taking care of it." The ballroom erupted into polite applause and soft laughter. At the head table, my mother, Denise, patted Terrence's hand. Terrence grabbed a microphone of his own, chuckling deeply into it. "That is right," he boomed, looking directly at me with a gaze that still held the same contempt he had for me 19 years ago. "Our Naomi always repents for her troubled past. It is the least she can do for the family." The sheer audacity of it hung in the air like thick smoke. They had cornered me in front of hundreds of their peers, expecting me to shrink, panic, and hand over my credit card to save face. They thought the public pressure would force me into submission. Before I tell you exactly what I did next, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched the people who destroyed your childhood try to auction off your adulthood? Drop a 1 in the comments below if you know exactly what I mean. Please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel because they thought I was just a frightened little girl who would hand over her black card to buy their approval. They had absolutely no idea that I actually owned the very building they were standing in. I did not break eye contact with my father. The applause slowly died down as the crowd realized I was not standing up to take a bow. I was not reaching for my purse. I just sat there, my hands neatly folded on the crisp white tablecloth. The silence stretched, turning from expectant to incredibly uncomfortable. Jasmine's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. She gripped the microphone a little tighter. "Well, Naomi," she prompted, her tone taking on a sharp, commanding edge. "Do not be shy. The event coordinator is waiting at the back by the double doors." I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, took a deliberate sip, and set it back down. The entire room held its breath. I did not raise my voice, but the acoustics of the ballroom carried my words perfectly. "I think there has been a profound misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady and ice cold. "I am not paying for a single appetizer in this room. If you wanted a $45,000 party, Jasmine, you should have checked your own husband's company ledger before booking the venue." Jamal's smug expression instantly vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. He took a half-step back, his eyes darting toward the exit. Terrence slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Do not embarrass us in front of these good people, Naomi." My father snapped his voice, dropping into that dangerous register he used to use right before things got violent when I was a teenager. You owe this family. Now go pay the bill. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. I do not owe you a dime, Terence, I replied, turning my back on the stage. And I suggest you all enjoy the crab cakes. They are the last thing you will ever try to put on my tab. As I walked toward the grand double doors of the ballroom, the murmurs of the crowd blurred into a dull roar. The furious, twisted expression on my father's face was burned into my mind. It was the exact same look he gave me 19 years ago. The air in the country club was warm and smelled of expensive perfume, but suddenly, all I could feel was the freezing bite of a Georgia thunderstorm and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, and I was 16 years old again. It was a Tuesday night in late November. The rain was coming down so hard it sounded like gravel hitting the roof of our suburban home. I was sitting on my bed studying for an advanced placement history exam. The house was quiet because my parents were at a charity dinner. They had left me in charge, which meant I was supposed to make sure my 14-year-old sister Jasmine stayed out of trouble. But Jasmine was never one to follow the rules. She resented my good grades and my quiet nature. She thrived on chaos, and my parents always excused her reckless behavior as simple youthful energy. Around 10 o'clock, the front door slammed open, echoing loudly through the empty halls. I rushed downstairs to find Jasmine standing in the foyer, soaking wet and hyperventilating. She was trembling so violently her teeth were chattering. Her hands were covered in dark grease, and something else that looked suspiciously like dried blood. She had sneaked out and taken my father's prized vintage sedan for a joyride with her friends. She looked up at me with wild, panicked eyes and told me she hit a man on a bicycle near the edge of town. She did not stop. She just kept driving, leaving him bleeding in the ditch. I was paralyzed with fear. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told her we had to call the police and call an ambulance immediately, but she started screaming hysterically. She said she would go to juvenile detention. She said our father would kill her. She begged me to help her cover it up. She said she knew a guy at a shady body shop who would fix the dented bumper and wash the undercarriage tonight, no questions asked, but he demanded $10,000 in cash up front. Before I could even process the horror of what she was saying, Jasmine ran into my father's home office. She always knew the combination to his floor safe because he used her birthday as the code. It was a daily testament to who the favorite child truly was. I followed her, begging her to stop and to think about the poor man she had left on the road. She ignored me completely. She spun the dial, yanked the heavy metal door open, and pulled out his emergency cash reserve. She shoved the thick stacks of $100 bills into her deep raincoat pockets. The heavy metal lockbox that held the money was left sitting on the expensive rug. I told her I was calling our parents right now. That is when her panic turned into something cold and terrifyingly calculated. Jasmine looked at me with an absolute emptiness in her eyes. She picked up the empty lockbox, marched right past me, and headed straight for my bedroom. She shoved the empty box deep under my bed, hiding it among my winter sweaters. I was so confused by her actions that I just stood there frozen. Then headlights swept across the front windows, casting long shadows on the walls. My parents were home early. Jasmine instantly dropped to her knees in the hallway and began wailing. It was a flawless performance. The front door unlocked and Terence and Denise stepped inside, shaking off their wet umbrellas. Before they could even take off their coats, Jasmine threw herself at my father's feet, sobbing uncontrollably. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me. She told them she caught me trying to sneak out into the storm to buy drugs. She told them I had been acting crazy all night, and when she tried to stop me, I hit her. She cried that I broke into the office safe and stole all the cash to pay off a local dealer. I stood at the top of the stairs, completely and utterly speechless. I looked at my mother, expecting her to see through the ridiculous lie. I was a straight-A student who had never even had a single detention. Jasmine was the one constantly getting suspended. But Denise just gasped, covered her mouth, and stared at me like I was a dangerous stranger. Terrence did not ask for my side of the story. He did not ask why Jasmine was soaking wet and covered in grease, while I was standing there in my clean flannel pajamas. He charged up the stairs, taking them two at a time. His face was purple with an ugly, terrifying rage. I tried to back away, trying to explain about the car, the hit and run, the shady body shop, but my words stumbled over each other in my panic. He shoved past me and stormed into my bedroom. He flipped my mattress, tearing my neatly organized room apart until he found the empty lockbox exactly where Jasmine had planted it. He held it up, his hand shaking with fury. I swore to him I did not take the money. I begged him to look in Jasmine's raincoat pockets. I begged him to just walk outside and look at the front bumper of his own car. But he was already entirely blind with anger. He grabbed me by the collar of my sleep shirt and hauled me out of my room. He dragged me down the stairs so violently my knees banged against the wooden steps, leaving dark bruises that would last for weeks. I was crying, pleading for my mother to intervene, but she just turned her back and wrapped her arms protectively around Jasmine, comforting the real thief. Terrence dragged me through the living room and threw open the front door. The storm outside was raging wind whipping freezing rain onto the porch. He shoved me out into the dark night. I stumbled and fell hard against the concrete steps, scraping my hands and knees. The pain flared hot against the freezing cold. I looked up at him through the blinding rain, tears streaming down my face. "You are a lying, thieving junkie!" he screamed, his voice booming over the loud thunder. "Get out of my house. I do not need a sick daughter. I will not let you destroy this family." He slammed the heavy oak door shut. I heard the heavy deadbolt click into place, locking me out of my own life. I was 16 years old, wearing nothing but thin cotton pajamas with no shoes, no phone, and absolutely nowhere to go in the middle of a torrential storm. The asphalt was freezing against my bare feet. Every step sent sharp shooting pains up my legs as I navigated the sharp gravel and debris washed onto the shoulder of the road. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left, but the rain was relentless. It soaked through my thin cotton pajamas, instantly clinging to my skin like a layer of ice. Cars drove past me occasionally, their bright headlights blinding me in the dark and spraying dirty puddle water onto my bare legs. Not a single one slowed down. I was shivering so violently, my jaw ached, and my teeth rattled against each other. The 3-mile trek to the only 24-hour gas station at the edge of our affluent suburb felt like an endless nightmare. With every agonizing step through the storm, the illusion of my perfect family washed away into the gutters. I realized in that freezing darkness that my father did not just believe a lie because he was tricked. He chose to believe it because it was easier than facing the ugly truth about his precious golden child. He needed me to be the villain so Jasmine could remain the victim. By the time the glowing neon lights of the convenience store finally came into view through the heavy downpour, I could barely feel my toes. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The entry bell jingled cheerfully overhead, creating a harsh, jarring contrast to the absolute terror I was experiencing. The overnight attendant, an older woman with kind, tired eyes, immediately dropped the magazine she was reading. She rushed out from behind the counter without hesitating. She grabbed a thick fleece blanket from a display rack and wrapped it tightly around my trembling shoulders. She did not interrogate me or ask why a teenager was wandering around in a severe thunderstorm without shoes. She just looked at my bruised knees and tear-streaked face, walked over to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and immediately dialed 911. She sat me down by a small space heater and handed me a cup of hot water, telling me I was safe now. 2 police cruisers arrived within 10 minutes. A female officer wrapped a foil thermal blanket over the fleece one and gently asked me what happened. I was exhausted, physically drained, and completely broken inside, so I just told her the absolute unfiltered truth. I told her about Jasmine coming home hyperventilating and covered in dark grease and blood. I told her about the hit and run, the stolen cash from the safe, the fake story my sister spun, and how my father threw me out into the freezing cold without even bothering to check his own vehicle. The officer's radio crackled. Another patrol unit had already been dispatched to investigate a severe hit and run involving a bicyclist on the county road just outside our neighborhood. The timeline matched my story perfectly. The officer stepped outside into the rain to make a phone call, and when she came back inside, her expression was stone cold. She told me a separate unit was heading to my parents' house right that second. I found out later exactly what went down at the house. 5 hours after Terrence locked me out, he was suddenly woken up by harsh red and blue lights flashing through his master bedroom window. He opened his front door annoyed, expecting the police to bring back his delinquent runaway daughter so he could yell at me again. Instead, 3 officers walked right past him, shining their heavy-duty flashlights directly onto his prized vintage sedan, parked in the driveway. The heavy rain had washed away some of the mud, but it could not wash away the deep, massive dent on the passenger side bumper or the dark crimson stains heavily smeared across the chrome. Terrence turned the color of ash. The arrogant rage he had shown me completely vanished. He tried to stammer out an explanation, claiming he had been asleep all night and that someone must have stolen his car and brought it back. The officers were not interested in his desperate excuses. They placed my father in handcuffs right there on his immaculate front porch. They read him his rights and arrested him for felony obstruction of justice and child abandonment. Jasmine watched from the upstairs window, terrified, her stolen $10,000 still hidden away, as they forced our father into the back of a squad car. Because my father was in a holding cell, and my mother was heavily implicated in the cover-up, Child Protective Services stepped in immediately. They absolutely refused to let me return to that toxic environment. By 6 in the morning, my father's older sister, Aunt Yvonne, burst through the double doors of the police precinct. She was a formidable, no-nonsense woman and a retired high school principal who had never bought into my parents' ridiculous favoritism. She marched right past the social workers, wrapped her strong, steady arms around me, and told them I was coming home with her. She looked me dead in the eye and promised me that nobody would ever throw me away again, and she kept that promise. Moving in with Aunt Yvonne was the catalyst that changed my entire trajectory. She taught me how to channel my deep trauma into relentless ambition. She helped me build the impenetrable armor I was wearing tonight at the gala. I turned away from the table, my emerald green suit catching the light of the crystal chandeliers above. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. 200 of Atlanta's elite were holding their collective breath, watching the prodigal daughter refuse to play the role she was assigned. I picked up my clutch and took my first step toward the grand exit. That was when Jamal decided to be the hero. He rushed down from the stage, his expensive dress shoes thudding heavily against the polished hardwood floor. He cut across the room and blocked my path. He tried to put on a tight, friendly smile for the watching crowd, but his eyes were hard and angry. He reached out and grabbed my forearm. His grip was entirely too tight. "Come on, Naomi," he muttered, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Stop making a scene. Do not embarrass the family again. You know this is a big night for your dad. After everything you put him through with the police when you were a teenager, you owe him this. Just hand over the card. You make a good salary now. Be the bigger person." I looked down at his hand gripping my sleeve, and then I looked back up into his desperate eyes. The sheer audacity of his gaslighting was almost impressive. They genuinely believed that if they repeated the lie enough times, I would eventually accept the guilt. "Remove your hand from my arm, Jamal," I said softly, but with enough venom to make him instantly release me. "I do not owe Terrence an apology, and I certainly do not owe him $45,000. The only person who embarrassed him tonight was the daughter standing on that stage holding the microphone. Jamal puffed out his chest, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You are being completely unreasonable," he hissed, stepping closer. "Jasmine worked hard to put this beautiful event together. Your business is doing great. We all know you have the money. Why are you being so selfish when your family needs you? I actually laughed. It was a short, cold sound that made him flinch. He thought he was dealing with the scared 16-year-old girl who was thrown into the rain. He did not realize he was talking to a woman who spent the last 19 years learning how to completely dismantle people just like him. You should be very careful about whose battles you choose to fight, Jamal, I told him, maintaining direct eye contact. You are standing here acting like the loyal son-in-law, blindly defending a family that will drain you dry the second it is convenient for them. He scoffed, shaking his head. I am not going to let you insult my wife, Naomi. Jasmine is perfect. She is doing everything she can to hold this family together. Is that what she told you? I asked, tilting my head slightly. That she is holding it all together. Because from where I am standing, your perfect wife is the only one spending money tonight. I find it incredibly fascinating that you are so deeply concerned about my bank account when you should be terrified about your own. Jamal froze. The fake confident posture cracked. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice dropping an octave. I leaned in just an inch closer so nobody else in the room could hear the bomb I was about to drop. Before you try to bully me into paying for this party, you might want to call your lead accountant. Take a very close look at the third quarter ledger for your logistics company, Jamal. Pay special attention to the offshore vendor payments, because your wife's taste in custom silk gowns and extravagant events is leaving a massive bleeding hole in your sinking ship. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the bright lights. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced back at the stage where Jasmine was standing, frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped the microphone stand. She could not hear what I was saying, but she could see the absolute panic washing over her husband. I smiled warmly at him, gave a polite nod to the silent crowd, and walked out through the double doors into the cool night air. I knew the real storm was just beginning, but this time I was the one bringing the thunder. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Atlanta penthouse, casting a warm golden glow over the imported hardwood floors. It was barely 8 in the morning. I was standing at my kitchen island, holding a mug of black coffee, wearing a silk robe, and looking out over the city skyline. This was my sanctuary. I had bought this condo in cash 3 years ago. It was a fortress of peace high above the noise of the streets and completely isolated from the toxic noise of my past. Or so I thought. The sharp buzz of the intercom shattered the quiet morning. I walked over to the security panel and pressed the button. It was the building concierge, sounding incredibly stressed. He apologized profusely and told me my parents and sister had bypassed the main security desk by tailgating a resident through the lobby doors. They were currently standing by the private elevators demanding to be let up and threatening to call the police to do a wellness check if he did not comply. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. I could have told him to have them escorted out by security. It would have been easy. But after the seed I planted in Jamal's mind last night, I knew exactly why they were here. They were panicking. I told the concierge to let them up. 2 minutes later, the heavy oak door of my condo swung open. Terrence, Denise, and Jasmine stepped over the threshold. The moment they entered, the dynamic shifted. For the first few seconds, none of them said a word. They were too busy staring. They had never been to my home before. They assumed I was just a mid-level accountant living in some modest apartment. As their eyes swept over the custom marble countertops, the original artwork on the walls, and the panoramic view of the city, I watched the realization hit them. I was not just comfortable. I was wealthy. Jasmine gripped her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were slightly puffy, indicating she had spent the night arguing with Jamal after my little revelation. But true to form, she had still managed to put on a full face of makeup and dress in an expensive cashmere sweater set. She looked around my living room, and I could practically taste the bitter jealousy radiating from her. Terrence cleared his throat, trying to regain his dominant posture. He puffed out his chest and frowned, attempting to look authoritative in a space he clearly could not afford. You should have answered your phone, he barked, stepping further into the room without taking off his shoes. We have been calling you since last night. I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them coffee. I just leaned back against the marble island and took a slow sip from my mug. My phone is for people I actually want to speak with, Terrence, I replied smoothly. What are you doing in my home? That was when my mother Denise stepped forward. She was the master architect of our family's twisted reality. Whenever Terrence used rage to control us, Denise used guilt and emotional manipulation. She wore a soft, placating smile, holding her hands out as if she were approaching a frightened animal. Now Naomi let us not start the morning with hostility. Denise cooed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. We are here because we are family, and family looks out for each other. Last night was just a silly misunderstanding. Emotions were running high. You know how much pressure your sister has been under lately, organizing that beautiful gala. She was just stressed and made a poor joke about the catering bill. You overreacted by storming out like that, but we are willing to forgive and forget. I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her words wash over me. A poor joke. They had cornered me in front of 200 people, attempting to extort $45,000 from me to fund their vanity project, and Denise was seamlessly repackaging it as a minor social faux pas. It was textbook gaslighting. She wanted me to doubt my own reality, to accept the blame for reacting to their abuse, rather than holding them accountable for the abuse itself. I did not overreact, Denise, I said, my voice perfectly level. I set a boundary. There is a very distinct difference. Denise waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a pesky fly. Boundaries are just buzzwords people use when they want to be selfish. She sighed, stepping closer to the kitchen island. Look, we did not come all the way down here to argue about a silly dinner bill. We came because Jasmine and Jamal are going through a slightly difficult time and they need your help. I shifted my gaze to Jasmine. She refused to look me in the eye, suddenly finding the intricate pattern of my area rug fascinating. A difficult time, I repeated, feigning ignorance. Jamal's logistics company is supposed to be the crown jewel of the family. Terrence brags about his brilliant son-in-law to anyone who will listen. What kind of difficult time could they possibly be having? Terrence stepped up beside my mother, crossing his arms over his chest. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. He interjected, his tone defensive. The economy is tough right now. Supply chain problems are hitting everyone in the industry. Jamal has some vendors breathing down his neck, and the banks are being unnecessarily difficult about extending his line of credit. It is a completely normal bump in the road for any major business. He is just a little overextended, Denise added, quickly placing a hand over her heart. And Jasmine is making herself sick with worry. They need a bridge loan just to get them through the next few quarters. We know you work in finance, Naomi. We know you have connections. And clearly, looking around this place, you have plenty of disposable income. They were actually asking me for a bailout. Less than 12 hours after trying to publicly humiliate me and bleed me dry for a party, they had the absolute nerve to show up at my sanctuary and demand that I save the golden child's husband from bankruptcy. The hypocrisy was staggering. They were painting a picture of an innocent, hardworking couple victimized by a tough economy. But I knew the truth. I knew about the offshore accounts. I knew about Jasmine's secret spending sprees. The business was not failing because of the supply chain. It was failing because my sister was treating it like her personal piggy bank. So, let me make sure I understand this, I said, setting my coffee mug down on the counter with a sharp clink. You break into my building. You dismiss your attempt to publicly extort me as a poor joke. And then you demand that I use my money to fix Jamal's failing business because Jasmine is stressed out. Do not use that tone with us. Terrence snapped, his face reddening. We are your parents. You are supposed to help your sister. It is your duty. You have more than enough money sitting around doing nothing. We are just asking for a temporary loan. I looked at the three of them standing in my beautiful home, bringing the exact same toxicity they had suffocated me with for years. They expected me to simply roll over and open my checkbook. They expected the trauma bond to hold. But the chain had been broken a very long time ago. I will not give you a single penny, Terrence. I said, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over my kitchen. I am not a bank, and I am certainly not an emergency fund for your golden child. Terrence's face turned a deep shade of crimson, his fists clenched at his sides. How dare you speak to me that way, he bellowed. We raised you, we provided for you. You owe this family your loyalty. You threw me out into a thunderstorm when I was 16 years old. I reminded him, my voice never rising above a conversational tone. Aunt Yvonne raised me. She was the one who put a roof over my head when CPS refused to let me return to your house. She was the one who made sure I finished high school. She was the one who taught me my worth. Denise let out a dramatic gasp, placing her hand over her chest, as if I had physically struck her. Oh, Naomi, why must you always live in the past? She wailed, her eyes welling up with forced tears. You were a difficult teenager. You were acting out. Your father made a split-second decision under extreme stress. We tried to get you back, but your aunt poisoned your mind against us. We did the best we could. Your best, I repeated, stepping away from the island and walking slowly toward them. Let us talk about your best, Denise. Let us talk about the year I turned 18. I was sleeping on a tiny fold-out cot in Aunt Yvonne's cramped sewing room. I was working 2 part-time jobs just to pay for my college textbooks and walking 3 miles to the bus stop in the snow. I had to beg the university financial aid office for a basic meal plan so I would not starve. Do you remember what you were doing that exact same year, Denise? My mother blinked, her fake tears momentarily drying up as she tried to calculate where I was going with this. I do not see what that has to do with Jasmine, she deflected, taking a small step back. It has everything to do with Jasmine. I snapped, the cold professional veneer finally cracking just a fraction. That same year, you and Terrence bought Jasmine a brand new silver Mercedes for her high school graduation. You paid cash. I know because Aunt Yvonne saw the photos you proudly plastered all over social media. You bought a luxury car for the daughter who stole $10,000 from your safe and framed her own sister while the daughter you wrongly accused was eating ramen noodles and sleeping on a metal cot. Jasmine finally spoke up, her voice shrill and extremely defensive. I needed a reliable car for college, she whined, crossing her arms over her chest. You always have to make everything about you, Naomi. You are so obsessed with keeping score. It is pathetic. You are sitting here in this $1 million penthouse, and you are still crying about a car from 15 years ago. I am not crying about a car, Jasmine, I said, turning my piercing gaze directly onto her. I am pointing out a very clear pattern. A pattern of absolute delusion that has led you directly to this exact moment. You were handed everything on a silver platter and you still managed to ruin it. And now, instead of facing the consequences of your own financial recklessness, you brought Mommy and Daddy to my house to bully me into fixing your mess. Terrence stepped between me and Jasmine, extending his arm to shield her. That is enough, he barked. Your sister is not reckless. She is a supportive wife dealing with a tough economy. Jamal is a brilliant businessman negotiating major international freight contracts. He just needs a little capital to smooth out some rough edges with his vendors. You are just jealous because Jasmine has a beautiful family and a loving husband, while you are sitting up here all alone in this empty apartment. I had to force myself not to laugh at the sheer absurdity of his statement. Jamal was not a brilliant businessman. Jamal was a sinking ship and Jasmine was the one drilling holes in the hull. But I could not reveal my hand just yet. I needed them to commit entirely to their false narrative, so the eventual fall would be absolute. So Jamal is brilliant, and Jasmine is just a supportive wife, I asked, tilting my head. And if I do not write this check for $500,000 right now, what exactly happens to this beautiful family you are so desperately trying to protect? They will lose everything, Terrence said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening growl. The bank will foreclose on the logistics warehouse. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs, and it will be entirely your fault because you were too bitter to help your own flesh and blood when you had the means to do so. You will carry that guilt for the rest of your life. He was trying to use the weight of other people's livelihoods to crush my resolve. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Make the victim feel responsible for the collateral damage caused by the abuser. But I was intimately familiar with the financial records of that logistics company. I knew exactly where the money had gone. It had not gone to employee payroll or warehouse maintenance. It had gone to designer handbags, luxury vacations, and offshore shell companies that Jasmine secretly controlled. I will not be held hostage by your threats, Terrence, I told him, crossing my arms over my chest. I will not fund Jasmine's lavish lifestyle. I will not bail out Jamal's company. My answer is no. It will be no today, and it will be no tomorrow. Denise abandoned her gentle mother routine entirely. Her face twisted into a nasty sneer. You are exactly what we thought you were, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You are a cold, heartless, selfish girl. You have all this money, and for what? You have no one to share it with. We came here giving you a chance to be part of this family again. We gave you a chance to redeem yourself, and you spit in our faces. You did not come here to offer me a family. Denise? I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the large open space of the penthouse. You came here looking for an ATM, and the machine is out of order. Terrence pointed a thick, trembling finger at my face. You are going to regret this, Naomi, he spat, his eyes burning with a furious hatred. I promise you that. You think you are untouchable sitting up here in your ivory tower, but family is everything. When everything else falls apart, family is all you have left. We will not forget this disrespect. I stood my ground, entirely unbothered by his empty threats. The door is exactly where you left it, I said, gesturing toward the expansive entryway. I suggest you use it before I have building security escort you out of my lobby. They stared at me for a long, tense moment, realizing that their usual tactics of guilt and intimidation were completely useless. The power dynamic had shifted permanently. Terrence grabbed Denise by the arm and stormed toward the foyer, muttering curses under his breath. He told my mother to wait for him by the private elevators, but Jasmine did not follow them out immediately. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen, letting our parents walk out of earshot. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving just the two of us standing in the living space. The air grew thick with a different kind of tension. Jasmine was no longer playing the stressed-out, supportive wife. The mask slipped completely, revealing the vicious, calculating girl who had planted a lockbox under my bed 19 years ago. She took a slow, deliberate step toward the kitchen island, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut before the air in the room shifted entirely. Without our parents here to act as her constant shield and audience, Jasmine dropped the fragile victim act completely. She walked over to the kitchen island, trailing her perfectly manicured fingernails across the cold, imported marble surface. She looked around my penthouse not with admiration, but with a deep, simmering resentment. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to calculate exactly how much all of this cost, and how unfair she thought it was that I possessed it while she was drowning in debt. You really think you are untouchable, do you not, Naomi? She asked, her voice dropping its high-pitched whine and taking on a low, venomous quality. You think because you bought a nice apartment and put on a tailored suit, you can just talk down to me like I am beneath you. I did not move. I just stood on the opposite side of the island, holding my coffee mug, letting the morning sunlight warm my back. I am not talking down to you, Jasmine, I replied calmly. I am simply refusing to fund your lies. There is a massive difference, and you know it. She let out a harsh, bitter laugh, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. You have always been so arrogant, always thinking you were the smartest person in the room just because you got good grades and played by the rules. But you do not know how the real world works. You think you can just cut off your family, walk away clean, and build your own little empire. It does not work like that. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her smartphone, placing it flat on the marble counter between us. She tapped the screen, illuminating the display with a bright, glaring light. I know exactly where you work, Naomi, she stated, a wicked smirk spreading across her face. You thought you were so secretive keeping your distance from us, but Atlanta is a very small city when you know the right people. You work at that premier forensic accounting firm in the financial district, the one that handles all the massive private equity accounts and high-profile corporate audits for the elite. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark liquid warm my throat. I did not confirm or deny her statement. I just let her talk. She was digging her own grave, and I was more than happy to stand back and hand her the shovel. My husband is a very well-connected man. Jasmine continued, her tone dripping with false confidence as she leaned her weight against the island. Jamal knows people on the executive board of your firm. He knows the corporate culture inside and out. Firms like that pride themselves on absolute spotless integrity. They handle hundreds of millions of dollars of other people's money. They cannot afford to have untrustworthy people on their payroll. They do extensive background checks, but sometimes juvenile records slip through the cracks, do they not? I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild curiosity. And what exactly is your point, Jasmine? My point is that it would be an absolute tragedy if the CEO of your firm received a personal phone call this morning, she said, leaning forward over the counter to close the distance between us. What do you think your boss would do if they found out their top-tier accountant is a documented thief? What if they found out you were kicked out of your own home because you stole $10,000 from your father's safe to buy drugs? The sheer audacity of her threat hung in the quiet morning air, blending with the faint sounds of city traffic far below. She was attempting to blackmail me, using the very lie she had constructed 19 years ago to cover up her own felony. She genuinely believed she held the ultimate trump card. She thought she could weaponize my fake past to destroy my present and force me into submission. You are going to transfer $500,000 into Jamal's business account by the end of the business day. Today, Jasmine demanded, her voice hardening into a direct, non-negotiable order. You are going to classify it as a silent private investment, so Terrence and Denise do not ask any questions. If the money is not in his account by 5 o'clock this evening, I am going to make that phone call. I will tell your CEO everything. I will post it on every professional networking site. I will ruin your reputation in this city so thoroughly you will never work in finance ever again. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She was waiting for the panic to set in. She was waiting for my calm professional facade to shatter into a million pieces. She expected me to beg her to keep quiet, to negotiate a lower price, to do exactly what she had done when she was 14, and realized she was in terrible trouble. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm or friendly smile. It was the kind of cold, terrifying smile that makes a predator realize they have just walked blindly into a steel trap. I set my coffee mug down on the counter with a soft thud. I reached into the deep pocket of my silk robe and pulled out my own smartphone. I unlocked it, tapped the screen a few times to open the keypad, and slid it across the smooth marble until it bumped gently against her manicured hand. "Make the call," I said, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any fear. Jasmine frowned, looking down at the illuminated screen of my phone. The blank dial pad was open and waiting. She looked back up at me, her smug expression faltering for just a fraction of a second. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice losing a bit of its sharp edge. "I am saving you the trouble of looking up the corporate directory," I replied, leaning my hands flat on the counter and locking my eyes onto hers. "You want to speak to the CEO of the firm? Go ahead, Jasmine. The number is right there. Dial it. Tell them exactly who I am. Tell them about the $10,000. Tell them about the thunderstorm and the safe. Tell them absolutely everything." She stared at me, completely thrown off balance by my total lack of fear. "You think I am bluffing?" she hissed, her fingers hovering nervously over the glass device. "You think I will not do it?" "I know you will do it," I told her, my tone dropping into a deadly serious register. "Because you are exactly the same desperate, calculating girl you were 19 years ago. You destroy everything you touch, and when the inevitable consequences come knocking, you scramble to find someone else to take the fall. But I am not your scapegoat anymore, so pick up the phone, Jasmine. Ruin my career right now." She hesitated. Her eyes darted around the luxurious kitchen, searching the corners of the ceiling for a hidden camera or a trap. She could not comprehend why I was handing her the exact weapon she threatened to use against me. She picked up my phone, her hand trembling ever so slightly. She looked at the blank dial pad and then back at my unblinking gaze. "You are crazy," she muttered, trying to sound tough but failing miserably. "You are actually going to lose everything over a stupid childhood grudge." I am not going to lose anything, I stated, stepping around the kitchen island, so there was no longer a physical barrier between us. "But since you are so eager to talk to the CEO, let me give you a piece of professional advice. When you make that phone call, you should probably make sure you have your financial facts completely straight. Because the person running that firm is not going to care about a fake juvenile record from almost 2 decades ago. They are going to care about corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and the illegal transfer of company funds into personal offshore shell accounts." Jasmine froze entirely. The color instantly vanished from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She slowly lowered my phone back onto the counter, as if it had suddenly caught fire. "Yes, Jasmine," I said softly, stepping right into her personal space so she had nowhere left to hide. "I know about the shell companies. I know about the vendor payments that do not actually exist on the official ledger. I know exactly how much money you have been systematically bleeding out of Jamal's logistics company to fund your pathetic illusion of wealth and pay for your secret lifestyle." "You are lying," she whispered, taking a stumbling step backward, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "You do not know anything. I know everything." I corrected her, my gaze locking onto her wide, panicked eyes. "So if you want to make that phone call to the CEO, I highly suggest you do it right this second. But you should probably know that when you dial that corporate number, the phone ringing will be the one sitting right in my pocket." She stared at me, the crushing realization hitting her like a physical blow to the chest. The absolute horror washing over her delicate features was worth every single second of the pain I endured over the last 19 years. "Get out of my house," I told her, my voice echoing with a quiet, absolute authority that left no room for argument. "And tell Jamal I will see him at his emergency investor meeting next week. I would not miss it for the world." Jasmine did not say another word. She dropped her gaze, spun around, and practically ran toward the front door, fleeing the penthouse as fast as her expensive shoes would carry her. I stood alone in the quiet morning light, listening to the heavy oak door slam shut behind her, finally feeling the scales of justice begin to tip heavily in my favor. The frantic clicking of Jasmine's expensive heels echoed down the hallway outside my condo, fading rapidly into the distance. I stood alone in the center of my kitchen, taking a deep breath of the peaceful morning air. I thought the confrontation was finally over. I turned to carry my empty coffee mug to the sink, but the heavy oak door was suddenly shoved violently open once again. It hit the wall with a loud crack that made me jump. My father Terence marched back into my penthouse. His face was a dark storm of rage, mixed with a sheer, unfiltered panic that I had never seen him display before. He must have crossed paths with a terrified, fleeing Jasmine out by the private elevators. He stepped over the threshold, slammed the door shut behind him, and reached out to turn the heavy brass deadbolt. He was locking us inside. "What did you say to your sister?" he demanded, his booming voice rattling the expensive artwork hanging on my walls. She came running out to the hallway, shaking like a leaf and crying her eyes out. "What kind of vicious lies did you spin to upset her like that?" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just leaned against the marble counter and watched him unravel. I simply advised her to make sure her own financial house was in order before she tried to threaten mine. "Terence," I replied smoothly, "if the truth makes her cry, then perhaps she should stop living a lie." Terence closed his eyes for a second and rubbed his temples. When he opened them again, the arrogant, domineering patriarch was gone. In his place stood an aging, desperate man who was watching his entire perfectly constructed world crumble into dust. He took a heavy step into the living room, the aggressive posture melting into something that looked dangerously close to begging. "You do not understand the gravity of the situation, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping the angry edge and adopting a tone of intense urgency. "This is not just about Jamal having a bad quarter. This is not just about Jasmine keeping up appearances. We are standing on the edge of an absolute cliff, and if you do not help us, we are all going to fall." I crossed my arms over my chest, letting silence stretch between us. I knew exactly how bad the situation was, but I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted him to confess his own foolishness out loud. 6 months ago, Jamal came to me in secret. Terrence continued, his hands trembling slightly as he unbuttoned his suit jacket. He told me the logistics company was facing a critical cash shortage because a major international client had defaulted on their invoices. He needed a massive injection of capital to keep the warehouse operating and the shipping trucks on the road. Jasmine was completely beside herself with worry. She was losing weight. She could not sleep. I could not stand by and watch my daughter suffer. "So, what did you do, Terrence?" I asked, keeping my expression entirely neutral. He swallowed hard, looking down at my imported hardwood floors, as if he could not bear to make eye contact with me. "I went to the bank," he admitted, his voice barely above a harsh whisper. "I took out a second mortgage on the house. I put my retirement home on the line. The house you grew up in, Naomi. I pulled out $400,000 in equity and handed it directly to Jamal to save his business." The absolute sheer magnitude of his blind stupidity was almost breathtaking. Terrence and Denise had spent decades building their affluent lifestyle in that massive brick colonial house in the suburbs. It was their pride and joy, their ultimate status symbol. And Terrence had secretly gambled his entire retirement on a son-in-law who was being systematically robbed blind by his own wife. And now the money is gone. I stated simply, connecting the dots for him. The bridge loan did not save the company. The bank wants their mortgage payments and Jamal cannot pay you back. Terrence looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "The bank is threatening to foreclose, Naomi. If Jamal goes under, my house goes with him. Your mother and I will be out on the street. We will lose absolutely everything we have worked our entire lives to build." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick folded stack of legal documents. His hands were shaking so badly the papers rustled loudly in the quiet room. He walked over to the kitchen island and slammed the paperwork down onto the marble surface right in front of me. "This is a commercial loan application," he explained, tapping a thick finger against the top page. "It is for $500,000. Jamal has already signed it as the primary borrower, but the bank will not approve it because his corporate credit is currently overextended. They need a co-signer with a pristine financial record and a high verifiable income. They need someone like you." I looked down at the documents and then back up at the desperate man standing across from me. "You want me to co-sign a $500,000 loan for a failing company to save the house you kicked me out of 19 years ago? You owe us this!" Terrence shouted, slamming his fist on the counter, his desperation instantly twisting back into rage. "Do not bring up the past. I am talking about right now. I am talking about your mother and your sister. We are your family. You work at a top-tier financial firm. Your boss can verify your salary. You will not even have to put up any of your own cash today. You just have to sign your name on that dotted line and guarantee the debt." I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of profound clarity. This was the ultimate trap. He was using his own impending homelessness to manipulate me into putting my signature on a document that would financially chain me to Jasmine and Jamal for the next 20 years. If I signed that paper, Jasmine would drain that new loan account dry in less than 6 months, and the bank would come directly after my assets to collect the debt. "I am not going to sign those papers, Terrence," I said, my voice icy and completely absolute. "I told Jasmine the truth, and I will tell it to you. Jamal's company is not failing because of a bad economy. It is failing because your precious golden child is bleeding it dry to fund her offshore accounts and secret lifestyle. She took your retirement money and she spent it." Terrence turned purple with fury. "That is a disgusting lie," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. Jasmine would never do something like that. She is a loyal wife. You are just trying to poison me against her because you have always been a jealous, spiteful little girl. You have always hated her because we loved her more. The truth hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. He had finally admitted it out loud. He loved her more. He had always loved her more. Even now, standing on the brink of total financial ruin because of her actions, he was choosing to defend her and attack me. If you do not pick up a pen and sign this document right now. Naomi, you are completely dead to me, Terrence snarled, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. I will officially and permanently disown you. You will be cut out of this family forever. I will make sure every aunt, uncle, and cousin we have knows exactly what a selfish, treacherous person you are. You will die alone in this empty apartment with your money and absolutely no one to mourn you. He thought the threat of being erased from the family tree would terrify me. He thought the fear of isolation would break my resolve. He had absolutely no idea that isolation from his toxicity was the exact prize I had been working toward my entire life. I was dead to you the night you threw me into the storm, Terrence, I said, smiling a cold, terrifying smile. Consider me disowned. It is the best gift you have ever given me. Terrence stared at me, his chest heaving, his mind completely unable to process the fact that his ultimate threat had completely failed. He snatched the loan documents off the marble counter, crumpling the edges in his furious grip. You are going to regret this, he whispered, his voice trembling with an impotent rage. When they come to take my home, I am going to make sure the whole world knows it was your fault. Keep your paperwork, Terrence, I told him, turning my back on him and walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. But if Jamal really wants to save his company, tell him I will see him at his emergency investor meeting next week. I will bring my own capital and we can discuss the future of his business in front of his entire board. Terrence paused halfway to the door. Hope, a desperate, pathetic kind of hope, briefly flashed across his face. He thought I was finally caving. He thought I was going to show up to the boardroom and write a corporate check to buy my way back into his good graces. He did not realize I was inviting him to his own public execution. He unlocked the deadbolt and walked out of my penthouse, leaving the door wide open behind him. The trap was officially set, and the Golden family was walking blindly right into it. 2 days after my father stormed out of my penthouse, leaving the heavy oak door wide open behind him, the first phase of my trap officially snapped shut. I knew Jasmine could not handle the crushing anxiety of waiting for Jamal's emergency investor meeting. Her entire life was built on controlling the narrative and bending reality to fit her desires. Right now, she felt completely out of control. She had spent the last 48 hours convincing herself that my quiet confidence in the kitchen was nothing more than a desperate bluff. In her twisted, narcissistic mind, I was still just a mid-level employee, desperately clinging to a corporate paycheck. She thought if she could strike first, if she could get me fired and publicly discredited, then my accusations about her massive embezzlement would look like the unhinged lies of a disgruntled, unemployed sister. It was a Tuesday morning. The Atlanta skyline was bright and clear. I was sitting at my custom mahogany desk on the top floor of the financial district's most prestigious high-rise. My firm occupied the top 3 floors of the building. We managed billions of dollars in private equity and handled the most complex forensic accounting audits in the state. I had my dual monitors open on my desk. One screen displayed the devastating forensic breakdown of Jamal's logistics company, highlighting every single offshore transfer and fake vendor payment my sister had authorized. The other screen showed the live, high-definition security feeds from the main lobby 50 floors downstairs. I took a slow sip of my coffee and watched Jasmine walk through the heavy, revolving glass doors. Jasmine was dressed for absolute corporate warfare. She wore a tailored crimson power suit perfectly matched with a designer leather briefcase that she had undoubtedly purchased using stolen company funds. She strutted across the expansive, polished marble floor of the lobby with her head held high, acting as if she owned the entire city block. It was the exact same arrogant, domineering posture she used to walk the halls of our high school after getting me grounded for her mistakes. She wanted to project immense wealth and absolute unquestionable authority. She walked straight past the plush velvet waiting area, ignoring the security checkpoint entirely, and marched directly up to the main reception desk. The head receptionist on duty was a brilliant, sharp young woman named Alicia. Alicia was highly trained to handle aggressive billionaires, panicked investors, and ruthless corporate sharks on a daily basis. Jasmine's little crimson suit and fake confidence did not even register as a threat on her radar. I clicked the audio feed button on my computer monitor, leaning back in my heavy leather executive chair to listen to the show. Jasmine slammed her perfectly manicured hands flat on the polished reception desk. "I need to speak with the chief executive officer immediately," she demanded, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous, high-ceilinged lobby. "It is a matter of extreme corporate security, and I do not have time to wait around." Alicia did not flinch. She kept her professional, welcoming smile perfectly intact, refusing to give Jasmine the satisfaction of an intimidated reaction. "Good morning, ma'am," Alicia replied smoothly, her voice calm and even. "Welcome to the firm. Do you have a scheduled appointment with the executive office today?" "I do not need a scheduled appointment," Jasmine snapped, tossing her heavily styled hair over her shoulder. "I am here to report a severe breach of ethics and employee theft. One of your senior accountants is a documented thief with a juvenile record and a long history of stealing large sums of cash from her own family. I have the evidence right here in my briefcase, and your CEO needs to see it right this second before your firm loses millions of dollars to a criminal." Alicia typed something deliberately into her keyboard, her expression remaining entirely unbothered by the dramatic performance. "I see," Alicia said calmly, maintaining direct eye contact with my furious sister. "And which specific employee are you reporting today, ma'am, so I can properly route your security concern?" Jasmine leaned in much closer, resting her elbows on the high desk, trying to physically dominate the space. "Her name is Naomi." "Jasmine," said her voice dropping into a harsh register dripping with pure venom, "she has been lying to your human resources department for years. I am her sister, and I am here to make sure she is terminated immediately and escorted off these premises. Now pick up your phone, call your boss right now, and tell them I am waiting downstairs." I watched the live video feed as Alicia paused, her hands hovering gracefully over her keyboard. She looked up at Jasmine and then glanced very subtly toward the corner security camera, knowing perfectly well that I was watching the entire exchange from the 50th floor. Alicia picked up her desk phone and dialed my private office extension. My desk phone rang softly in the quiet luxury of my office. I picked it up, never taking my eyes off the security monitor. "We have an unexpected visitor in the main lobby," Miss Alicia said, her voice perfectly professional over the speaker, carrying no hint of the amusement I knew she was hiding. "A woman in a red suit is demanding an emergency audience with you. She claims to have highly urgent information regarding a fraudulent and criminal employee named Naomi." I smiled a cold, genuine smile, setting my coffee mug down on the mahogany desk. "Send her up, Alicia," I replied, my voice steady and commanding. "Tell building security to give her temporary executive elevator access. Let her come all the way to the top floor." Down in the lobby, Alicia hung up the phone. She tapped her screen, printed a temporary VIP visitor badge, and slid it across the marble counter toward my sister. "The chief executive officer has agreed to see you immediately," Alicia told her, gesturing toward the private elevator banks. "Please take the executive elevator on your left directly to the top floor. The doors will open straight into the main administrative suite." Jasmine snatched the plastic badge off the marble counter, a triumphant, wicked smirk spreading rapidly across her face. She genuinely believed she had just won the ultimate victory. She thought her intimidation tactics had worked perfectly. She thought she had bypassed all the corporate red tape and was about to walk into the office of some old, wealthy businessman to spin her practiced web of lies and get me thrown out onto the street. She clipped the visitor badge to her crimson lapel and strutted toward the executive elevators, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the marble like a rapidly ticking countdown clock. She stepped into the spacious wood-paneled elevator car and pressed the button for the top floor. The heavy brass doors slid shut, hiding her smug expression from the lobby cameras. She was on her way up completely unaware of the reality waiting for her. She thought she was riding an elevator to her ultimate triumph, to finally crush the sister she had despised for 19 years. She had absolutely no idea that she was stepping directly into her own slaughterhouse. I stood up from my desk, smoothed the front of my tailored suit, and walked out of my office to personally welcome my sister to my empire. I walked out of my corner office and stood near the frosted glass partition that separated the main executive suite from the private elevator bank. The 50th floor was incredibly quiet. The thick premium carpet absorbed all sound, and the air smelled of expensive leather and fresh espresso. My executive assistant Jonathan was sitting at his sleek reception desk, typing away on his computer. I gave him a slight nod, and he returned it with a knowing professional smile. We had prepared for this exact moment. We both heard the soft, pleasant chime of the elevator arriving at the top floor. The heavy brass doors slid open, and Jasmine stepped out into the suite. She paused for a moment, taking in the sheer opulence of the space. She looked at the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline stretching out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, and then she looked down at her own crimson suit, adjusting her jacket. She looked incredibly proud of herself. She genuinely believed she had successfully bypassed all the corporate security and was about to destroy my life. She walked up to Jonathan's desk with that same arrogant swagger she had carried since we were teenagers. "I am here to see the chief executive officer," she announced, placing her designer briefcase on his desk. "The lobby receptionist sent me up. I have an emergency corporate matter to discuss, and I expect absolute confidentiality." Jonathan stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with perfect grace. "Of course, ma'am," he said, gesturing toward the long hallway lined with expensive abstract art. "The CEO has cleared her schedule specifically for you. Please follow me." Jasmine practically beamed with self-importance. She followed him down the hall. I slipped back into my office through the private side door just seconds before they reached the main entrance. I sat down in my heavy leather executive chair, folding my hands neatly on top of my immaculate mahogany desk. I took a deep, steadying breath, perfectly arranging my features into a mask of absolute cold authority. Jonathan opened the heavy double-glass doors. "Right this way," he said, stepping aside to let my sister enter the room. Jasmine strutted through the doorway, her head held high, completely ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. Jonathan closed the doors behind her with a soft click, leaving the two of us completely alone in the massive corner office. Jasmine stopped dead in the center of the room. Her eyes locked onto me, sitting behind the desk. The triumphant, wicked smirk on her face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer utter confusion. She looked at me and then looked around the massive room, searching for an older man in a suit. She could not comprehend what she was seeing. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded, her voice dropping to an angry, harsh whisper. "Are you insane, Naomi? You are going to get fired for sitting in the boss's chair. Get up right now before they see you. You are making this too easy for me." I did not move. I just leaned back in my chair and looked at her. "Nobody is going to fire me, Jasmine," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the large space. "You wanted to speak to the chief executive officer. You wanted to report an employee for theft. I am listening. Go ahead and make your report." Jasmine stared at me, her brain completely short-circuiting. She could not process the information. She refused to accept the reality right in front of her face. "You are a mid-level accountant," she stammered, pointing a trembling manicured finger at me. "You do not own this office. You are playing a stupid prank. You hacked the lobby system or something. I am going to call security on you myself." I reached over and pressed the intercom button on my phone. "Jonathan," I called out. "Yes, Miss Naomi," his voice replied instantly over the speaker, clear and respectful. Could you please bring in the third quarter financial projections for the private equity board meeting this afternoon? I asked, keeping my eyes locked on my sister. Right away, CEO, he replied. I released the button. Jasmine's face turned the color of chalk. Her eyes darted from the phone to my face, and then slowly moved to the heavy frosted glass wall behind me, where my name was etched in bold, elegant silver lettering. Naomi Founder and Chief Executive Officer. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on her like a physical weight crushing the breath out of her lungs. The massive corporate firm, the billion-dollar private equity accounts, the mahogany desk, and the panoramic view of the city, all of it belonged to me. The sister she had thrown into the rain 19 years ago was not just surviving. She was ruling an empire. I built this company from the ground up, Jasmine, I told her, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the desk. While you were driving the silver Mercedes our parents bought you, I was working 80-hour weeks building my capital. While you were marrying Jamal and pretending to be a wealthy socialite, I was acquiring commercial real estate and absorbing failing logistics companies. And while you were embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from your own husband to fund your secret lifestyle and your secret boyfriend, I was the one who bought your company's bank debt. The mention of the embezzlement and the secret boyfriend was the final breaking point. The illusion of the golden child was completely obliterated. Jasmine lost whatever thin shred of sanity she had left. The polished corporate facade shattered into a million pieces right there on my expensive rug. She let out a piercing, completely unhinged scream that rattled the glass walls of my office. She grabbed her designer briefcase and hurled it across the room with all her might. It smashed into the frosted glass wall, spilling fake corporate documents, lipstick, and a compact mirror all over the floor. You ruined everything, she shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly, unrecognizable mask of pure hatred. You set me up. You planned this just to humiliate me. You are a jealous, bitter monster. She lunged toward my desk, swiping her arm across the polished wood, trying to knock over my expensive dual monitors. I calmly rolled my chair back out of her reach and pressed the silent panic button hidden underneath the lip of the desk. You did this to yourself, Jasmine, I said, watching her throw a violent, childish tantrum in the middle of my office. You walked into my building and demanded an audience to ruin my life. I simply gave you exactly what you asked for. The only difference is that this time, I am not the one who is going to be thrown out. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy double doors burst open. Two massive security guards wearing tailored black suits rushed into the office. They did not hesitate or ask questions. They grabbed Jasmine by both arms, physically lifting her off the floor as she kicked and screamed like a toddler. Let go of me, she wailed, thrashing wildly against their iron grips, her crimson suit wrinkling and her hair flying in every direction. I am going to sue you, Naomi. I am going to destroy you. Dad is going to make you pay for this. You cannot do this to me. The guards dragged her backward out of the office. Her expensive heels scraped aggressively against the plush carpet. Escort this woman out of the building. I ordered the guards, my voice absolutely ice cold, cutting through her hysterical screams. If she ever sets foot on this property again, have her arrested for criminal trespassing. Do not let her stop in the lobby. Take her straight out to the street. The heavy glass doors swung shut completely, cutting off her frantic screaming. The executive suite instantly returned to its hushed, peaceful silence. Jonathan quietly walked into my office a few moments later. He knelt down, picked up her spilled briefcase, gathered her scattered belongings, and carried them away without saying a single word about the absolute chaos that had just unfolded. I pulled my chair back up to my desk, straightened my suit jacket, and turned my attention back to my computer monitors. My heart was beating entirely at a normal pace. My hands were perfectly steady. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the first wave of devastation had been successfully delivered. Now all that was left to do was watch Jamal and Terrence walk blindly into the boardroom next week and realize I held the keys to their entire existence. The silence in my corner office was absolute. The heavy double doors had sealed completely, shutting out the echo of Jasmine's frantic screaming. I sat alone at my mahogany desk, breathing in the quiet luxury of the empire I had built. The adrenaline from the confrontation was already fading, replaced by the cold, calculating focus that made me the most feared private equity executive in Atlanta. I turned my chair back toward my dual monitors. The screens were glowing with the dense, complex spreadsheets of Jamal's commercial logistics company. Jasmine thought I was just a bitter sister making wild guesses to scare her. She had absolutely no idea how deep my access truly went. When Jamal's company began defaulting on their commercial loans, his bank was desperate to offload the high-risk debt. My firm specialized in acquiring distressed corporate assets. I bought Jamal's paper for pennies on the dollar through one of my holding companies. I was legally his primary creditor. And with that position came the absolute right to conduct a full, unhindered forensic audit of his entire financial history. I opened the master ledger. On the surface, the company looked exactly like Jamal had described to my father. It looked like a victim of tough macroeconomic trends. Fuel costs were up. Shipping contracts were delayed. The profit margins were shrinking. Jamal was not a criminal. He was just a deeply foolish man who made one catastrophic mistake. He trusted his wife blindly. Jamal spent 70 hours a week at the shipping yards managing the freight and the drivers while he let Jasmine act as his unofficial chief financial officer. He gave her complete unchecked access to the corporate accounts, the payroll systems, and the vendor payment portals. Forensic accounting is essentially digital bloodhound work. You do not look at what the numbers say. You look at what the numbers are actively trying to hide. I started by tracing the outgoing cash flow, focusing on the largest monthly expenditures. I immediately noticed a glaring anomaly. There was a recurring pattern of massive payments being routed to 3 specific third-party logistics vendors. They were billed as independent contractors providing overflow warehouse space and emergency fleet maintenance. The invoices were perfectly formatted, but something felt incredibly wrong. The payment amounts were always just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic fraud alert from the corporate banking software. I dug deeper. I pulled the physical addresses for all 3 vendors. They were not sprawling commercial warehouses or heavy-duty mechanic shops. They were empty virtual office spaces registered in Delaware. I ran the tax identification numbers through my firm's proprietary corporate database. The results loaded instantly on my screen, confirming my exact suspicions. The 3 vendors were actually shell limited liability companies, and the registered agent who filed the paperwork for all 3 of them was a boutique legal firm that Jasmine had hired 3 years ago. She was approving massive weekly invoices from fake companies she secretly owned, and Jamal was signing the checks without ever verifying if the services were actually rendered. Once the corporate money hit those shell accounts, Jasmine began the laundering process. It was a sophisticated operation for someone who claimed to just be a stressed-out housewife. She diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, effectively hiding the assets from domestic tax triggers and Jamal's accountants. But a very significant portion of the stolen money stayed right here in Georgia to fund an aggressive and highly secretive second life. I tracked the credit card statements linked directly to the domestic shell accounts. The transaction history was a roadmap of pure, unadulterated vanity. She was spending $20,000 a month on custom jewelry, designer handbags, and exclusive spa treatments. There were receipts for first-class flights to Paris and Dubai, booked on weekends when she told Jamal she was attending wellness retreats in the mountains. She was living like a billionaire heiress while her husband was drowning in corporate debt and begging my father for a bailout. But the clothes and the vacations were just the beginning. The most damning expenses were buried under the real estate and automotive categories. Jasmine was paying $12,000 every single month for a luxury penthouse apartment in a completely different zip code across the city. She was also making massive lease payments on a brand new imported sports car. I pulled the public property records for the penthouse and the vehicle registration data for the car. The name on both documents was not Jasmine. It was a man named DeAndre. I opened a new tab and ran a comprehensive background check on the name. DeAndre was 26 years old. He was a personal trainer and an aspiring social media influencer. He had absolutely no verifiable corporate income of his own, but his public online profiles painted a very different picture. His pages were plastered with high-definition photographs of him posing on yachts wearing expensive watches and leaning against the exact same sports car Jasmine was quietly funding through her shell companies. I scrolled through his feed, my face remaining entirely completely devoid of emotion. I found a photo of him sitting on the balcony of the luxury penthouse, holding a glass of champagne. In the background, reflected faintly in the glass of the sliding door, was the distinct silhouette of my sister holding the camera. Jasmine was entirely financing a secret life with a man nearly a decade her junior. She was stealing her husband's livelihood to play sugar mama to an influencer. I sat back in my heavy leather chair, letting the sheer, sickening magnitude of the betrayal wash over me. Jasmine had not just ruined Jamal. She had absolutely decimated our parents. I opened the specific ledger for the month when Terrence had provided his emergency bailout. I cross-referenced the dates and the dollar amounts. The $400,000 Terrence pulled from the equity of his retirement home had hit Jamal's corporate account on a Tuesday morning. Jamal thought that money was going to save his shipping trucks, but by Thursday afternoon, Jasmine had manually transferred $350,000 of it directly into her Delaware shell companies. The realization was as sharp as a razor blade. She took the money our father traded his life savings for, and she used it to pay the annual rent on DeAndre's penthouse and buy him a new car. Terrence was going to be completely homeless because he chose to blindly trust his golden child. And the golden child had literally handed her father's house over to her secret lover. It was poetic justice in its purest, most brutal form. The very favoritism that had destroyed my childhood was now the exact weapon dismantling their entire lives. I spent the next 4 hours meticulously printing every single piece of evidence. I printed the offshore bank statements, the wire transfer receipts, the property deeds, the vehicle registration, and the glossy high-definition photographs from DeAndre's public profiles. I organized every single document into a thick, premium black binder. The numbers told a flawless, indisputable story. There was absolutely no room for gaslighting. There was no room for Denise to cry and make pathetic excuses. There was no room for Terrence to yell and demand loyalty. The facts were absolute, and they were devastating. I closed the black binder, running my hand over the smooth leather cover. I was officially ready for the emergency investor meeting. The storm they threw me into 19 years ago had finally circled back around, and I was about to unleash it directly inside their boardroom. I slid the heavy black binder into the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk and locked it. The physical evidence of my sister's complete moral bankruptcy was secure. Over the next 48 hours, the silence from my family was deafening. I knew exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of their suburban homes. Jasmine had undoubtedly rushed straight from my corporate building to Jamal, spinning a frantic, chaotic web of lies. Knowing her, she probably claimed I was unhinged, that I verbally attacked her in the lobby, and that I had absolutely no real power at the firm. She would never admit that she had been dragged out by security or that I was the chief executive officer. Admitting my success would shatter her fragile ego and expose her own spectacular failures. So she kept my secret safe, wrapped tightly in her own desperate delusions, hiding the truth from both her husband and our parents. On Thursday morning, an email arrived in my secure private inbox. It was an official calendar invitation from Jamal's logistics company. The subject line read, "Emergency Board and Investor Meeting." The location was a high-end rented conference room at a luxury hotel downtown, not his actual commercial warehouse. That detail alone told me absolutely everything I needed to know. Jamal was bleeding cash and defaulting on his loans, but he was still spending money he did not have to project an image of success. He was trying to set a theatrical stage. My father had clearly helped him orchestrate this calculated move. Terrence always believed that public pressure was the ultimate weapon. He thought that if he put me in a room full of wealthy businessmen, corporate lawyers, and desperate creditors, I would shrink back into the frightened little girl I used to be. He thought I would be too embarrassed to refuse them in front of an audience. It was the exact same intimidation tactic he tried to use at his retirement gala, just amplified to a formal corporate scale. Attached to the email was a highly redacted financial summary and a newly drafted commercial loan agreement. They had actually filled out the paperwork in advance with my name neatly typed in as the primary guarantor for a $500,000 line of credit. They were treating my financial compliance as a foregone conclusion. Terrence had appended a brief, arrogant note to the bottom of the email. It read, "Naomi, we expect you to be there promptly at 2 o'clock on Friday. Family stands together when it counts. Do not embarrass us again." The sheer blinding entitlement radiating from the computer screen was almost laughable. They were demanding $500,000 from a woman they had systematically abused and discarded, and they were framing it as a basic family obligation. They wanted me to save their sinking ship, while Jasmine continued to drill massive holes in the hull to buy sports cars and luxury penthouses for her teenage boyfriend. I did not ignore the email. I did not call my father to argue or negotiate or tell him off. I simply hit reply and typed a single deliberate sentence. "I will see you on Friday, and I will bring the capital you need." I hit send and closed my laptop. By sending that one brief message, I knew exactly what kind of celebration would instantly erupt in my father's living room. Terrence would confidently tell Jamal that his tough love approach had worked. Jasmine would breathe a massive sigh of relief, genuinely believing she had successfully bullied me into submission and secured her secret slush fund for another year. They would sleep soundly thinking they had won. But my RSVP was not a surrender. It was a chilling promise, and it was not a lie. I was absolutely bringing the capital. I already owned their debt. I held the absolute power to either liquidate their assets or restructure their entire miserable existence. I just was not going to give them the bailout they were expecting. I was going to give them an execution. I spent the rest of Thursday afternoon in the secure conference room with my lead corporate attorney. We meticulously reviewed every single clause of the debt acquisition documents. My firm utilized a complex network of anonymous holding companies to acquire distressed corporate debt, which was exactly why Jamal and his accountants had no idea I was his new primary creditor. I needed to ensure that my holding company's ownership of his commercial loans was completely legally bulletproof. When I walked into that rented boardroom, I did not want to leave a single loophole for them to exploit. My attorney, a ruthless veteran of hostile corporate takeovers, smiled sharply when he handed me the final certified copies of the debt transfer. He confirmed that Jamal was technically already in severe default. I had the legal authority to seize the commercial warehouse, liquidate the shipping fleet, and freeze all corporate operating accounts the very moment I decided to pull the trigger. The logistics company was effectively mine. Jamal just did not know it yet. The night before the meeting, I stood on the expansive balcony of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. The air was crisp and cool. There was no thunderstorm rolling in. There was only a profound, quiet stillness. I thought about the terrified 16-year-old girl wandering barefoot on the freezing asphalt, crying for a father who had slammed the heavy oak door in her face. For 19 years, I had carried the agonizing weight of that rejection. I had let their twisted narrative define my early adulthood. I had worked myself to the bone trying to prove that I was worthy of the space I occupied in the world. But standing there looking at the massive corporate empire I had built with my own two hands, I finally realized the absolute truth. Their rejection was never about my flaws. It was never about my mistakes. It was entirely about their desperate need to protect their own toxic dysfunction. Jasmine was a parasite. Terrence was an enabler blinded by his own massive arrogance. Jamal was a foolish pawn who traded his financial security for a pretty face and a fake smile. Tomorrow, they were all going to gather in a luxury conference room, completely convinced that they had successfully trapped the family scapegoat. They thought they held the high ground, They thought they were the predators, and I was just the prey, walking blindly into their snare. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking straight into a steel cage, and I was the one holding the only key. I went back inside, locked my glass balcony doors, and laid out my sharpest charcoal gray power suit for the morning. I was going to sleep perfectly well tonight, knowing the storm they started 19 years ago was finally about to end. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy, suffocating blanket of southern humidity settling over the city of Atlanta. I stepped out of the back of my town car in front of the grand entrance of a luxury downtown hotel, wearing the perfectly tailored charcoal gray power suit I had laid out the night before. I carried no purse and no briefcase. I carried only one single item: the thick, premium black binder containing the absolute destruction of my sister's carefully constructed world. I walked through the revolving glass doors, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble of the lobby floor. I took the elevator up to the private executive conference center on the 12th floor. I pushed open the heavy double mahogany doors of the rented boardroom and stepped inside. The sheer audacity of the setup hit me immediately. For a man who was allegedly weeks away from total corporate bankruptcy and facing the foreclosure of his father-in-law's retirement home, Jamal had spared absolutely no expense. The room was massive, featuring a long, polished mahogany table that could easily seat 20 people. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the city skyline. At the back of the room, a fully staffed catering team was quietly arranging a lavish spread of imported sparkling water, artisan sandwiches, and expensive pastries. He was bleeding cash, but he was still desperate to project an illusion of unstoppable wealth. I stood near the entrance for a moment, observing the players on the stage. My father, Terence, was holding court at the far end of the room near the windows. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, and laughing loudly with three older men. I recognized them instantly. They were wealthy members from his exclusive suburban country club. Terence had brought them here specifically to serve as his audience. He wanted to fill the room with important, successful men, so that the social pressure on me would be absolutely unbearable. He firmly believed that if he cornered me in front of his high-status friends, I would be too embarrassed to refuse his demands. Jasmine was seated near the head of the table next to Jamal's empty chair. She had completely abandoned the aggressive crimson power suit she wore when she tried to invade my corporate office. Today, she was playing the role of the devoted, stressed, and highly supportive wife. She wore a soft blush pink dress with a modest neckline, her hair pulled back into a simple, elegant clip. She looked like a fragile flower weathering a difficult storm. But as my eyes locked onto hers, I saw the raw terror flashing beneath her carefully applied makeup. She quickly broke eye contact and stared down at the blank legal pad in front of her, gripping her expensive pens so tightly her knuckles were white. She had not told them the truth about my position. She was still praying I was just bluffing. I walked slowly across the plush carpet and selected a chair at the exact opposite end of the long table. It was the power position directly facing the projector screen and Jamal's designated seat. I sat down, placing the heavy black binder flat on the polished wood in front of me, and folded my hands neatly on top of it. Terence noticed me taking my seat. He excused himself from his wealthy friends and marched confidently down the length of the table. He leaned heavily on the back of the empty chair next to me, an arrogant, smug smile plastered across his face. "I am glad to see you decided to do the right thing, Naomi," he said, his voice kept low, but carrying a sharp, threatening edge. "The men by the window are highly influential investors. Two of them own regional construction firms. The other two men sitting across the table are junior commercial loan officers from a local credit union. We are going to show them a unified front today. You are going to sit here, smile, and sign the guarantor paperwork when Jamal presents it. If you cause a scene or embarrass this family in front of my friends, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." I looked up at him, my expression completely devoid of any emotion. "I told you I would bring the capital, Terence," I replied smoothly, my voice barely a whisper. "I highly suggest you return to your seat and pay very close attention to the presentation. You are about to learn exactly how unified this family truly is. Terence narrowed his eyes, trying to read my cold demeanor. He mistook my calm certainty for submission. He gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder and walked back to his designated seat near the front of the room, puffing his chest out proudly. He genuinely believed his intimidation tactics had worked perfectly. He thought he had successfully trapped the family scapegoat. The low hum of conversation faded as Jamal walked to the front of the room and clapped his hands together, rubbing them briskly. He was wearing an expensive custom-tailored suit, but he looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his smile was incredibly tight and forced. He signaled to the catering staff to step out into the hallway and close the heavy mahogany doors behind them. The trap was officially sealed. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. Jamal began projecting his voice to fill the large space. He dimmed the overhead lights slightly and clicked a remote, pointing it at the projector. The massive screen behind him hummed to life, displaying the sleek, professional logo of his commercial logistics company. As many of you know, the logistics and freight industry has faced some unprecedented macroeconomic headwinds over the past 2 quarters. Jamal continued pacing slowly in front of the screen. We are dealing with massive supply chain disruptions, unexpected spikes in diesel fuel costs, and delayed invoice payments from several of our international shipping partners. He clicked to the next slide. It displayed a beautifully formatted bar graph showing a temporary dip in revenue, followed by a massive projected upward spike for the next fiscal year. It was a classic hockey stick graph designed to make investors feel confident about a quick recovery. While our temporary cash flow has been squeezed, our fundamental business model remains incredibly strong. Jamal lied smoothly, his eyes scanning the room and completely avoiding my gaze. We have 3 major shipping contracts pending execution next month. These contracts will guarantee a massive influx of steady capital. But to secure the specialized fleet required for these new routes and to keep our current warehouse operations running smoothly through this brief transition period, we require a temporary bridge loan. I sat silently at the end of the table watching him spin a web of complete corporate fiction. He was not lying about the pending contracts. I knew from my forensic audit that the shipping routes were real, but he was entirely lying about where the company's money had actually gone. The revenue had not been squeezed by fuel costs or supply chain issues. The revenue had been systematically drained into offshore shell accounts by the woman sitting right next to him. Jamal clicked to a slide outlining the loan request. "We are seeking a $500,000 line of credit," he announced, his voice steady and practiced. "This capital will be allocated exclusively for fleet maintenance, driver payroll, and securing the upcoming international vendor contracts. With this brief injection of cash, we will be perfectly positioned to double our market share by the 4th quarter." Terence stood up from his chair right on cue, playing his designated role in this orchestrated charade. He buttoned his suit jacket and looked around the room at his wealthy friends and the junior bank officers. "If I may say a few words," Terence boomed, his deep voice commanding the attention of the boardroom. "I have known Jamal for many years. He is a visionary. He is a man of absolute integrity and relentless hard work. He works day and night to provide a beautiful life for my daughter Jasmine. I have personally reviewed his business model, and I can assure you that this company is a goldmine waiting to be fully tapped." Terence paused for dramatic effect, turning his gaze down the long table to lock eyes directly with me. "But more importantly, this is a family business." Terence continued, his tone shifting into a thick, heavy layer of emotional manipulation. "And in our family, we do not let our own fall behind. We stand together through the tough times because we know the good times are just over the horizon. When one of us needs support, we step up without hesitation. That is the true measure of character." He was practically spelling it out for the room. He was establishing a narrative where anyone who refused to help Jamal was inherently lacking in character and family loyalty. It was a brilliant psychological trap designed to box me into a corner. Jamal gave Terence a grateful nod and stepped back up to the table. "Exactly, Terence." "Thank you," Jamal said, picking up a thick stack of legal documents. Because of the temporary nature of this cash flow issue, traditional commercial lenders have asked for a secondary guarantor on the bridge loan, someone with a pristine financial record to simply co-sign the agreement and provide an added layer of corporate security. Jamal began walking slowly down the length of the long mahogany table, holding the documents in his hands. I am incredibly proud to say that we did not have to look very far, Jamal announced, his voice swelling with fake pride. My sister-in-law Naomi has generously agreed to step in and guarantee this line of credit. She is a highly successful accountant in this city, and her willingness to back this company shows the absolute strength, unity, and financial solvency of our entire family enterprise. The men in the room nodded in approval, murmuring quietly to each other. They looked at me with polite respect, completely buying into the beautiful, heartwarming story of a successful family coming together to save a brilliant business. Jasmine was gripping her water glass so tightly her hand was visibly shaking. Jamal reached the end of the table. He stopped right in front of me. He slid the thick commercial loan agreement across the polished wood until it rested directly against the edge of my black binder. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a heavy gold pen, and placed it deliberately on top of the signature page. The room fell entirely silent. Everyone was watching me. The junior bankers were waiting to verify the signature. Terrence was glaring at me with a fierce warning in his eyes, silently commanding me to pick up the pen. Jamal stood over me, holding his breath, a desperate, hopeful smile frozen on his face. "Whenever you are ready, Naomi," Jamal said softly, tapping the edge of the paper. "Your signature goes right there on the bottom line." I looked down at the gold pen resting on the fraudulent legal document. I did not reach for it. I did not move. I just looked up and let my eyes travel slowly from Jamal to Terrence and finally to Jasmine. The trap had been fully sprung. The audience was perfectly attentive. The stage was set. I slowly placed my hands on the cover of the black binder and smiled. I did not pick up the heavy gold pen. I did not even look at the signature line. Instead, I reached out and pushed the fraudulent commercial loan agreement back across the polished mahogany table. I pushed it just hard enough that it slid right off the edge and hit the carpeted floor with a soft, dismissive thud. A collective gasp echoed from the junior loan officers sitting across the room. Jamal's hopeful smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, panicked confusion. I picked up my black binder and smoothly pulled out the ultra-thin silver laptop I had tucked underneath it. I stood up from my chair, my heels clicking purposefully against the floorboards as I walked the entire length of the long table toward the front of the room. "What are you doing?" Jamal whispered, his voice trembling as I approached the podium. I did not answer him. I simply reached over, unplugged the presentation cable from his computer, and connected it directly into my own. The massive projector screen flickered for a fraction of a second. Jamal's beautifully fabricated hockey stick graph disappeared entirely. It was instantly replaced by the stark high-definition dashboard of my firm's proprietary forensic audit software. The corporate logo of my private equity firm was watermarked faintly in the background, a silent testament to exactly who was holding the reins of this meeting. I turned to face the room, resting my hands lightly on the edges of the podium. "Jamal is absolutely right about one thing," I announced, my voice projecting effortlessly across the dead silent boardroom. "This commercial logistics company is currently experiencing a catastrophic cash flow shortage. But I can assure everyone in this room that it has absolutely nothing to do with macroeconomic headwinds, diesel fuel costs, or delayed international invoices." The wealthy investors leaned forward in their leather chairs, their casual, arrogant postures entirely vanishing. They were businessmen. They recognized the interface of top-tier financial auditing software, and they instantly knew this was no longer a friendly family pitch. I clicked my wireless presentation remote. The first slide appeared on the massive screen. It was a side-by-side forensic comparison of Jamal's stated revenue versus the actual certified bank deposits. As you can clearly see on the left, the revenue from your major shipping contracts actually cleared the corporate accounts exactly on schedule, I explained, tracing the numbers with a laser pointer. The money arrived. Your clients paid their bills in full. The fundamental business model is generating a profit. You are not a victim of a tough economy, Jamal. Jamal stared up at the screen, his brow furrowed in deep, desperate confusion. Naomi, what is this? He asked, his voice cracking. Where did you get this financial data? Our accountants prepared those reports. Your accountants are either entirely incompetent or they are willfully blind. I cut him off, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. Because if they had looked at your outgoing cash flow, with even a fraction of professional scrutiny, they would have seen exactly why you cannot afford to pay your own drivers. I clicked to the next slide. A massive complex web of bright red lines appeared on the screen, connecting the logistics company's main operating account to 3 specific third-party vendors. Over the past 3 years, exactly 42% of your gross revenue has been systematically funneled into these 3 supposedly independent logistics contractors, I stated, keeping my eyes locked on Jamal. You signed these invoices. You personally approved hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments for emergency fleet maintenance and overflow warehouse space. Jamal nodded vigorously, desperately trying to regain control of the rapidly collapsing narrative. Yes, exactly, he stammered, gesturing toward the screen. Those are our critical overflow partners. We need them to handle the excess freight volume during peak seasons. That is standard industry practice, Naomi. You are misrepresenting basic operating expenses to make us look bad. I smiled. It was the exact same cold, terrifying smile I had given my sister in the kitchen of my penthouse. Standard industry practice involves paying companies that actually exist, Jamal. I clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in, aggressively highlighting the tax identification numbers and the physical mailing addresses of the 3 vendors. Take a very close look at your critical partners, I instructed the room. These are not commercial warehouses. These are not heavy-duty mechanic shops. These are 3 empty virtual office spaces registered as Shell Limited liability companies in the state of Delaware. They do not own a single commercial shipping truck. They do not employ a single driver. They have never moved a single piece of freight for your company. You have been wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars into an absolute black hole. The boardroom erupted into a low, chaotic murmur. The 2 junior loan officers from the credit union immediately flipped open their laptops, furiously typing notes and pulling up their own internal risk assessment files. The wealthy country club investors exchanged dark, highly concerned looks. The illusion of a safe, lucrative investment was evaporating right in front of their eyes. Nobody was going to sign a bridge loan for a company actively hemorrhaging cash to fake vendors. Terrence could not handle the absolute shift in power. He realized I was not just refusing to sign the guarantor document. I was actively destroying the entire financial presentation in front of his elite wealthy friends. His entire plan to use social pressure to bully me into submission had spectacularly backfired. He slammed his heavy hands down on the mahogany table and pushed himself violently up from his chair. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. "Turn that projector off right now," Terrence bellowed, his voice echoing violently off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I did not touch the remote. I simply turned my head and looked at him, completely unbothered by his explosive rage. "I will not sit here and let you sabotage your sister's family," Terrence screamed, pointing a thick, trembling finger at me from across the long table. "You are making up these numbers. You are hacking into their systems to manipulate the data because you are a jealous, spiteful little girl. You came here specifically to embarrass us. The financial data on this screen is pulled directly from the certified bank records, Terrence," I replied, my voice slicing through his hysterical shouting like a surgical blade. "It is entirely factual. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been illegally laundered out of this logistics company through fraudulent invoicing. It is corporate embezzlement on a massive felony scale." "You are a sick liar," Terrence roared, his chest heaving with fury. He was reverting to the exact same script he used during the freezing thunderstorm 19 years ago. If the facts did not align with his perfect reality, the facts had to be a malicious lie. He needed me to be the villain so his golden family could remain the victims. You have always been a sick, twisted liar. He continued spitting the words across the room. You lied about the money in my safe when you were a teenager, and you are lying about this company right now. Someone call the hotel security and get her out of this building immediately. Security is not going to remove me from this boardroom, Terrence. I told him, my posture perfectly straight and my gaze unwavering. And absolutely nobody in this room is going to invest a single dime into this sinking ship until I am completely finished talking. Jamal was practically hyperventilating. He looked frantically back and forth between the damning red lines on the massive projector screen and his furious, screaming father-in-law. The reality of his financial ruin was finally breaking through his blind trust. Naomi, please, Jamal begged, his voice dropping into a desperate, pathetic whisper. I do not understand any of this. If those companies are fake, where is all my money going? Who owns those offshore accounts? I did not answer him immediately. I looked past Jamal. I looked past my screaming, red-faced father. I locked my eyes directly onto Jasmine. She was sitting perfectly still in her chair near the head of the table. Her soft blush pink dress suddenly looked like a tragic costume. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly I thought her manicured nails might actually snap off. She was not breathing. She knew exactly what slide was coming next. The entire boardroom was perfectly primed for the ultimate execution, and there was absolutely nowhere left for her to hide. Jasmine was staring at the massive projector screen like a condemned prisoner looking at the gallows. I pressed the button on my wireless remote one more time. The complex web of red lines vanished entirely. It was instantly replaced by a high-resolution scan of the official articles of incorporation for all three Delaware shell companies. I used the digital laser pointer to highlight the bottom right corner of the document where the registered owner had signed their name in thick black ink. Look very closely at the signature, Jamal, I instructed, my voice echoing cleanly in the dead silent room. Tell me whose name is officially listed as the sole proprietor of the vendors who have been bleeding your commercial logistics company dry for the last 3 years. Jamal leaned forward, squinting his tired eyes at the bright screen. He read the cursive handwriting once, and then he read it again. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head, as if he was trying to physically dislodge a terrible nightmare from his brain. That is my wife's signature, he whispered, his voice so fragile it sounded like it might break in half. That is Jasmine's handwriting. Naomi. I do not understand why her name is on these vendor contracts. Because she is the vendor, Jamal, I stated flatly, dropping the absolute heaviest truth of the afternoon directly onto the polished mahogany table. Your wife has been systematically embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from your corporate operating accounts. She set up fake logistics companies, authorized the fraudulent invoices herself, and then intercepted the funds before your accountants could ever verify the services. She is the one who bankrupted your business. A sharp collective gasp rippled through the boardroom. The wealthy country club investors practically recoiled in their heavy leather chairs. The two junior loan officers from the credit union immediately slammed their laptops shut, their faces pale with shock. Terrence froze entirely, his mouth hanging open, his furious face suddenly draining of all color as the mathematical reality finally hit him. That is a lie. Jasmine finally screamed, her voice shrill and completely panicked. She jumped up from her chair, knocking it backward onto the plush carpet. She pointed a violently shaking finger at me. She forged those documents. She is a computer hacker. She is trying to frame me just like she tried to frame me when we were teenagers. Do not listen to her, Jamal. She is a sick, jealous monster. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical shouting. I simply clicked the remote again. The screen shifted, displaying the corresponding bank records for the domestic shell accounts and the wire transfer receipts. I do not need to forge anything, Jasmine, I replied calmly, walking away from the podium and moving closer to the center of the boardroom table. The financial trail is absolutely undeniable. But the corporate embezzlement is only the first half of the story. The real tragedy is what she actually did with your money, Jamal. I clicked the remote. A side-by-side comparison appeared on the massive screen. On the left was the massive $400,000 wire transfer that Terrence had provided from his retirement home equity. On the right was the exact destination of those specific funds less than 48 hours later. Your father-in-law took out a second mortgage to save your shipping trucks, Jamal, I explained, locking eyes with the devastated man. But your wife immediately transferred $350,000 of that specific emergency capital into a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And she used the remaining $50,000 to make a massive down payment on a luxury penthouse across the city and a brand new imported sports car. Jamal was physically shaking now, a penthouse he choked out gripping the edge of the heavy table for support. We do not own a penthouse, we live in the suburbs. Jasmine, what is she talking about? Jasmine was hyperventilating, her hands desperately clutching her blush-pink dress. Stop talking, she shrieked at me, tears of pure, desperate rage streaming down her carefully contoured face. Turn that projector off right now. You have no right to look at my private finances. Your private finances were entirely funded by corporate fraud, I fired back, my tone sharpening into a deadly blade. Which means they belong to the primary creditor of this logistics company. I clicked the remote one final time. The complex financial documents disappeared. The massive screen was instantly filled with 4 high-definition glossy photographs, pulled directly from public social media profiles. The room collectively stopped breathing. The photos featured a handsome, muscular 26-year-old man named DeAndre. In the first photo, he was leaning against the exact same imported sports car Jasmine had leased through her shell company. In the second photo, he was standing on the balcony of the luxury penthouse holding a glass of expensive champagne. But the third and fourth photos were the absolute killing blow. They were candid shots taken inside the penthouse living room, and sitting clearly in the background, lounging on a custom white leather sofa wearing designer sunglasses purchased with stolen corporate funds, was my sister Jasmine. Meet DeAndre. I announced, letting the sheer brutal reality of the images wash over the boardroom. He is a 26-year-old personal trainer and aspiring social media influencer. He has no corporate income of his own because he does not need one. Your wife is his primary investor, Jamal. She took your life savings, she took your father-in-law's retirement home, and she used it to play sugar mama to a man almost a decade younger than her. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. The illusion of the perfect supportive wife, the golden child, the flawless affluent family was completely and totally obliterated. There was no more gaslighting. There was no more emotional manipulation. The truth was 10 feet tall and glowing brightly against the boardroom wall. Jamal looked like a man who had just been shot directly in the chest. He stumbled backward away from the table, his eyes locked on the massive photograph of his wife lounging in another man's penthouse. He looked at Jasmine, who was standing completely frozen, her face a mask of absolute terrified guilt. Tell me it is not true, Jasmine. Jamal begged, his voice cracking and breaking into a heavy sob. Tell me you did not steal my company to buy a car for another man. Tell me you did not bankrupt us for this. But Jasmine could not maintain the delicate facade anymore. The undeniable photographic proof had completely shattered her fragile, narcissistic reality. Instead of breaking down in remorse or begging for forgiveness, she exploded in pure, unadulterated venom. Her elegant blush-pink dress suddenly looked ridiculous as her face twisted into a mask of ugly, furious hatred. "You are pathetic, Jamal," she screamed at her husband, her voice echoing violently through the high-end boardroom. "You were running this logistics company straight into the ground long before I ever took a single dime. You work 70 hours a week at a dirty shipping yard, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it. I deserved better. I deserved a real man who could give me the lifestyle I was promised. I took that money because you were too weak to earn it yourself." She spun around to face Terrence, who was still standing completely paralyzed by the window. "And do not look at me like that, Dad. she shrieked, pointing a vicious manicured finger at him. You are the one who practically forced me to marry him because you thought his business was a good investment. You handed over your retirement money because you wanted to look like the big hero of the family. It is your own fault you lost your house. You are all pathetic. Jasmine grabbed her heavy designer handbag off the table and hurled it directly at the projector screen. It bounced harmlessly off the wall and hit the floor, spilling her expensive cosmetics across the carpet. She let out a guttural, animalistic scream of pure frustration. The carefully constructed golden child, the flawless, affluent daughter, the perfect corporate wife, had completely vanished, leaving behind nothing but a vicious, greedy parasite who had finally been exposed to the harsh light of reality. The junior loan officers were hastily grabbing their briefcases and rushing out the heavy mahogany doors, desperate to escape the massive legal liability unfolding in front of them. The wealthy country club investors were staring at Terence with expressions of profound disgust and pity. Terence collapsed back into his leather chair, his hands covering his face, as he realized that he had traded his entire life and his home for a daughter who viewed him as nothing more than an ATM. I stood quietly by the podium, watching their empire of lies burn to the absolute ground. But I was not finished yet, because while Jasmine had successfully bankrupted the logistics company, they still did not know who actually held the power to destroy them. It was finally time to deliver the absolute final blow and end the storm they started 19 years ago. The remaining wealthy investors from Terrence's country club stood up in unison. They did not say a word to my father. They simply buttoned their suit jackets, gave me a brief, respectful nod, and walked out of the heavy mahogany doors. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with this radioactive family disaster. Within moments, the only people left in the massive rented boardroom were Jamal, Jasmine, Terrence, and me. Jasmine was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling as she glared at her husband. She wiped a smear of mascara from under her eye. "You can cry all you want, Jamal," she sneered, kicking a fallen lipstick tube across the carpet. "But we are done. I am filing for divorce in the morning, and I am taking half of whatever is left of this miserable company. You can keep the shipping trucks. I want the cash." I stepped away from the podium and walked back toward the center of the long table. "You are not taking half of anything, Jasmine?" I said, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the room. She whipped her head around to look at me, her eyes blazing with defiant arrogance. "You do not control my marriage, Naomi," she snapped. "The law says I am entitled to half of the marital assets. You can show all the pictures you want, but you cannot stop me from getting my share." I reached down and placed my hand flat on the thick, premium black binder resting on the table. "You cannot take half of a company that your husband no longer owns," I stated smoothly. Jamal looked up, his face stained with tears. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hollow. "It is my company. My name is on the incorporation papers." "Your name is on the paperwork, but your corporate debt was entirely out of control, Jamal," I explained, looking directly at him. 6 months ago, when you started defaulting on your primary commercial loans, your bank classified your business as a distressed asset. They wanted to offload the high-risk debt before you officially declared bankruptcy. My private equity firm specializes in acquiring distressed corporate assets. Terence slowly lifted his head from his hands. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He was beginning to understand the terrifying reality of what I was saying, but his brain was fighting desperately against it. "I utilized a network of anonymous holding companies to purchase your paper from the bank for pennies on the dollar." I continued, my tone completely professional and completely merciless. "I did not just come here today to expose my sister. I came here to officially notify you of your financial standing. I own your commercial debt, Jamal. I am your sole primary creditor." The silence that followed was so profound it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. "And according to the terms of your original loan agreement, which I now hold, you have been in severe default for over 90 days. I said, tapping my finger against the black binder. I have the absolute legal authority to seize the commercial warehouse, liquidate the shipping fleet, and freeze all corporate operating accounts. Effective immediately, your logistics company belongs to me. You have absolutely no marital assets left for Jasmine to take. There is no cash. There are no trucks. There is nothing but the criminal charges you are going to file against her for embezzlement. Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She stumbled backward, her legs hitting the edge of a leather chair. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning. The arrogant smirk, the defiant demands, the illusion of control, it was all completely wiped away. She was walking away from this marriage with absolutely nothing but a mountain of stolen debt and a 26-year-old boyfriend who would disappear the second the corporate funds dried up. But the absolute worst reaction came from the far end of the room. Terrence stood up, his knees shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing onto the floor. His face had turned a sickening shade of ash gray. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. "Naomi?" He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "My house. My retirement home. The second mortgage I took out to give Jamal the bailout money. It is tied to the company." "Yes, Terrence," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "Your second mortgage is intrinsically linked to the financial solvency of this logistics company. A company that your golden child systematically destroyed to buy luxury cars and penthouses for another man. When I liquidate these corporate assets to recover my investment, the bank is going to call in your mortgage. You cannot make the payments. They are going to foreclose on your home." Terrence let out a sound that I will never forget. It was a deep, guttural moan of absolute despair. It was the sound of a proud, arrogant patriarch, realizing that his entire legacy was completely gone. He had spent his entire life building his wealth, projecting an image of upper-class perfection, and fiercely protecting the daughter who mirrored his own toxic vanity. He threw me out into a freezing thunderstorm when I was 16 years old to protect that exact illusion. And now, 19 years later, the very daughter he protected was the one who had literally rendered him homeless. "Please, Naomi." He begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his weathered cheeks. He let go of the table and took a stumbling step toward me. "Please, you cannot do this. You are my daughter. I am your father. We can fix this. You own the company now. You can forgive the debt. You can save the house. Do not put your mother and me out on the street. I am begging you." I looked at the man who had dragged me by my collar, who had screamed that I was a sick liar, who had slammed a heavy oak door in my face, while I stood barefoot in the freezing rain. I looked at the man who just 20 minutes ago had threatened to ruin my life if I did not sign a fraudulent loan document to save his precious reputation. "I do not need sick parents in my house, Terrence," I told him, repeating the exact words he had screamed at me all those years ago. Terrence collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands and sobbing uncontrollably. The great Terrence, the unshakable patriarch, was completely broken. Jasmine was still backed against the wall, shaking her head in violent denial, muttering to herself that this could not be happening, that she was going to call her lawyers. Jamal was sitting perfectly still, staring blankly at the projector screen, where the photos of his wife's betrayal still glowed brightly against the wall. He was ruined, but at least now he finally knew the truth. I reached over and unplugged my thin silver laptop from the projector. The massive screen instantly went completely black, plunging the front of the room into shadows. I closed the laptop, slid it back under my arm, and picked up the heavy premium black binder. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer any final words of advice or empty condolences. I turned my back on the absolute chaos I had unleashed and walked calmly toward the exit. My heels clicked with a steady, rhythmic precision against the floorboards echoing through the large room. I pushed open the heavy double mahogany doors and stepped out into the quiet, brightly lit hallway of the hotel's executive center. I let the doors swing shut behind me, sealing my family inside the tomb of their own making. A profound sense of peace washed over me entirely, replacing the heavy, agonizing weight I had carried in my chest for 19 years. The storm was finally over, and I was the one walking away completely untouched. I stepped into the waiting town car on the street level and instructed my driver to take me back to my office. I did not spend the weekend checking my phone or wondering what happened inside that boardroom after I left. I did not feel an ounce of guilt or regret. I already knew exactly how the dominoes were going to fall, and I had absolutely no intention of trying to catch them. For 19 years, my family had operated under the delusion that they were invincible. But the truth is an absolute force of nature, and when it finally breaks through the dam, it completely washes away everything in its path. The fallout was not gradual. It was immediate, and it was entirely catastrophic. Jamal had spent his entire marriage being the passive, loving husband who blindly trusted his beautiful wife. He had worked grueling 70-hour weeks at the shipping yards while she systematically drained his life savings. But watching Jasmine stand in that boardroom screaming that he was weak and defending the man she bought with his money permanently shattered his passivity. The blind trust instantly mutated into an absolute white-hot fury. By Monday morning, Jamal did not just file for divorce. He went on a relentless legal offensive that completely dismantled my sister's reality. He hired one of the most aggressive and ruthlessly effective family law attorneys in Atlanta. The very first thing his lawyer did was file an emergency injunction to freeze every single joint bank account, credit card, and line of credit attached to Jasmine's name. Jamal changed the locks on their suburban home while she was out and instructed the neighborhood security gate to completely revoke her access. Jasmine realized very quickly that the endless river of corporate cash had suddenly completely dried up. She was locked out of her own home and her credit cards were bouncing at the local coffee shop. In her typical desperate fashion, she tried to flee the sinking ship. She packed whatever designer clothes and luxury jewelry she had in the trunk of her least imported sports car and drove straight across the city to the luxury penthouse. She fully expected her 26-year-old boyfriend to open the door and take her in. She thought her fabricated romance would save her. But DeAndre was a social media influencer, not a provider. His entire affection was entirely conditional upon the lifestyle she could finance for him. The moment Jasmine showed up at his door dragging her luggage and hysterically explaining that her husband had frozen her accounts and that she was suddenly entirely broke, his demeanor changed. He did not offer her a shoulder to cry on. He did not promise to stand by her side through the difficult times. He looked at the frantic broke woman standing in his hallway, realized the corporate slush fund was permanently closed, and he quite literally shut the door in her face. He changed his phone number that same afternoon and quietly abandoned the penthouse lease a week later, leaving her with absolutely nowhere to go. But the divorce and the humiliating rejection from her boyfriend were only the beginning of Jasmine's nightmare. Jamal was not just interested in ending the marriage, he wanted absolute justice for the destruction of his company. He took the exact forensic data I had displayed on that projector, the massive black binder full of wire transfers, shell company registrations, and bank signatures, and he walked straight into the local police precinct. He handed the entire meticulously organized file over to the Financial Crimes Division. Because the amount of money Jasmine had stolen crossed state lines through her Delaware shell companies and involved the deliberate manipulation of corporate banking portals, the local police immediately escalated the case. The authorities did not need to spend months conducting a lengthy investigation. My forensic audit had already done all the heavy lifting for them. The paper trail was absolutely flawless and completely undeniable. 2 days later, a judge signed a felony arrest warrant for my sister. Jasmine was sitting in the lobby of a budget hotel, desperately trying to call my parents to beg for a room, when the police finally caught up with her. It was not a quiet, discreet arrest. 2 uniformed officers walked right through the automatic sliding doors of the lobby, called out her name, and ordered her to place her hands behind her back. The golden child, the perfect affluent daughter who had spent her entire life looking down on everyone else, was publicly handcuffed and read her Miranda rights in front of a dozen staring strangers. She screamed and cried, begging the officers to call her father, claiming there had been a terrible misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding, and Terrence could not save her this time. They placed her in the back of a squad car and drove her directly to the county jail, where she was formally processed, booked, and fingerprinted. She was forced to trade her custom silk gowns and expensive cashmere sweaters for a standard-issue Orange County jumpsuit. The district attorney charged Jasmine with multiple counts of felony corporate embezzlement, severe wire fraud, and grand larceny. Because the total amount she had stolen from Jamal's logistics company exceeded several $100,000, the mandatory sentencing guidelines were incredibly severe. Jasmine was not looking at a slap on the wrist or a brief period of probation. The prosecutors were absolutely unyielding. The perfect sister who had framed me for stealing $10,000 when we were teenagers was now facing a very real possibility of spending the next 10 to 15 years of her life in a federal prison. She had spent 19 years living a beautiful, extravagant lie built entirely on the pain and suffering of others. But the universe has a very strict accounting system, and Jasmine's balance was finally due. She was sitting in a cold concrete cell entirely alone, completely stripped of her fake wealth and her false superiority. She had no husband, no boyfriend, and no corporate money to hide behind. She was finally forced to face the absolute ugly reality of exactly who she was and the terrifying consequences of everything she had done. While Jasmine was adjusting to the harsh reality of her concrete cell, the financial shockwaves she created finally reached the affluent suburbs. My legal team moved with absolute surgical precision to liquidate the commercial logistics company. We seized the massive warehouse, auctioned off the entire shipping fleet, and permanently froze every single corporate operating account to recover my initial private equity investment. The moment the business was officially dissolved by the state, the secondary financial triggers were immediately activated. Terrence and Denise received the certified letter from their primary bank on a Tuesday morning. Because the massive bridge loan was secured directly by the equity in their retirement home, the complete collapse of Jamal's company meant the bank was calling in the debt. Terrence owed them $400,000 payable immediately in full. He did not have it. His retirement savings were entirely depleted, and his monthly pension was barely enough to cover their basic grocery bills and utility costs. The foreclosure process was not a quiet or dignified affair. It was a brutal, highly public dismantling of the flawless, upper-class illusion my parents had spent their entire adult lives constructing. The bank did not care about Terrence's exclusive country club membership. They did not care about Denise's high status in the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. They only cared about the unpaid debt on the ledger. Within 3 weeks, a massive, brightly colored public auction sign was hammered directly into the center of their perfectly manicured front lawn for the entire neighborhood to see. I did not drive out to the suburbs to watch them suffer, but I heard the pathetic details through the inevitable grapevine of extended relatives who suddenly wanted to talk to me. The social fallout for my parents was absolute and immediate. The wealthy friends Terrence had proudly invited to the boardroom, the same powerful men who witnessed his ultimate humiliation, completely stopped returning his phone calls. Denise was quietly but firmly asked to step down from all her prestigious charity committees. Their entire affluent social circle evaporated overnight, entirely unwilling to associate with a family embroiled in a massive felony embezzlement scandal and a highly publicized foreclosure. They were given exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. They were forced to pack up 3 decades of accumulated wealth and memories into cheap cardboard boxes while their judgmental neighbors watched from across the street. The bank formally seized the property and auctioned it off to a real estate developer, leaving my parents with absolutely nothing but the clothes in their suitcases and a handful of personal items. They had to abandon the sprawling brick colonial home with its heated swimming pool, the custom marble kitchen, and the grand staircase. With their credit completely destroyed and their savings gone, they signed a lease on a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the far edge of the city. The building had peeling paint, a broken security gate, and a constant roach problem. It was the absolute, ultimate poetic justice. They had sacrificed their absolute financial security and their beloved sanctuary to blindly protect a golden child who never actually loved them. Jasmine had viewed their beautiful home as nothing more than a temporary bank account to fund her secret lover. My parents were left sitting in a dark, cramped apartment, completely bankrupt and socially exiled entirely because of their own relentless toxic favoritism. Exactly 1 month after the boardroom meeting, the weather in Atlanta took a sharp, bitter turn. A massive low-pressure system moved in, blanketing the downtown district in a freezing, torrential downpour. I had worked late that evening, finalizing the acquisition of a new commercial real estate portfolio for my firm. By the time I took the private executive elevator down to the main lobby, the streets were slick with dark rain, and the wind was howling through the concrete canyons of the financial district. My chauffeured town car was waiting patiently by the curb. I pushed open the heavy revolving glass doors, stepping out under the large canvas awning that protected the entrance of my corporate building. That is when I saw them. Terrence and Denise were standing on the absolute edge of the sidewalk, completely exposed to the freezing rain. They did not have umbrellas. Their cheap coats were soaked through, clinging tightly to their shivering frames. Terrence looked like he had aged 20 years in a single month. His broad shoulders were slumped and his proud, domineering posture was completely broken. Denise was weeping silently, the cold rain washing away her tears as quickly as they fell. They had obviously been waiting outside my corporate headquarters for hours, entirely desperate to catch me before I went home to my secure penthouse. They shuffled quickly under the canvas awning as I approached my waiting car. Naomi, my father, called out, his voice weak and raspy, completely stripped of its former booming authority. "Please wait. Just give us 2 minutes of your time." I stopped and turned to face them, pulling my warm cashmere coat a little tighter around my shoulders. I did not feel angry. I did not feel vindictive. I just felt a profound, heavy emptiness looking at the two broken strangers who happened to share my genetics. "We have absolutely nowhere else to go," Denise sobbed, taking a trembling step toward me. "The new apartment is terrible, Naomi. The heating system is broken, and the landlord refuses to fix it. We cannot afford to pay the rent and buy our prescription medications at the same time. Your father is sick with worry. His heart cannot take this kind of stress. We are your parents. You cannot just leave us out here to suffer." Terrence reached out his shaking hand, hovering in the cold air between us, as if he wanted to grab my arm, but was too terrified of the consequences to actually touch me. "We know you have a massive guest house at your new property," he pleaded, his eyes wide and completely desperate. "We know you have the space. You do not even have to see us. Just let us stay there. Let us have a safe, warm roof over our heads. We will clean the property. We will do anything you want. We are begging you. Please save us." I looked at my father standing in the freezing, torrential rain, begging me for shelter. The absolute irony of the universe was a beautiful, terrifying thing. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second and I was 16 years old again, standing barefoot on the freezing asphalt, the heavy oak door slamming shut in my face. I remembered the biting cold sinking into my bones. I remembered the absolute terror of being thrown away by the very people who were supposed to unconditionally protect me. I opened my eyes and looked directly into my father's desperate, weathered face. "You threw me into a storm exactly like this one when I was 16 years old." I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady over the loud sound of the pouring rain. "You did not care if I froze to death on the street. You did not care if I starved. You looked at me standing barefoot in the cold and you locked the door." Terrence flinched violently as if I had physically struck him across the face. "That was a terrible mistake," he cried out, fresh tears streaming down his wet cheeks. "I was wrong, Naomi. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. I am sorry. Please forgive me." "Forgiveness is reserved for people who actually take accountability, Terrence," I replied smoothly. "You are only apologizing today because you are entirely out of options. You bet your entire life and your entire fortune on Jasmine, and you lost everything. Now you want me to pay your debts and house you. But my bank is permanently closed to you. I turned away from them and reached for the heavy door handle of my waiting town car. Naomi, please. Denise wailed, her voice cracking with pure pathetic desperation as she grabbed her husband's arm. We are sick. We are old and we are sick. You cannot do this to your own family. I paused, holding the open car door. I looked back at them one final time, the freezing rain sweeping across the wet pavement between us. I do not need sick parents in my house, I said, delivering the exact words he had screamed at me 19 years ago. I slid into the warm leather back seat of the town car and pulled the door shut. The heavy tinted glass rolled up entirely, cutting off the sound of their desperate weeping. I instructed my driver to take me home, and I did not look back a single time as the car pulled away from the curb, leaving them standing entirely alone in the miserable storm they had created. It took me 19 long years to realize that the family you are born into is never a life sentence. You do not owe your absolute peace to people who actively seek to destroy it. You do not owe your financial success to people who treated you like a burden when you had absolutely nothing to give them. Breaking a deep trauma bond is not cruel. Setting an absolute boundary is not selfish. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. They thought kicking me out into the freezing storm would break my spirit. They thought I would crumble under the heavy weight of their rejection. They had absolutely no idea that the storm would teach me exactly how to harness the lightning. I took their abuse and I used it as the solid foundation to build an impenetrable corporate empire. Today, I am completely surrounded by a chosen family of people who genuinely love me, respect me, and value my presence. My life is completely peaceful because I hold the absolute keys to my own sanctuary, and I alone decide who is allowed to enter it. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own mental peace? Have you ever confidently walked away from the people who completely underestimated your absolute worth? Drop a 1 in the comments below and share your personal story with me. I read every single one of them. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real stories of surviving, healing, and thriving. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it is entirely okay to walk away from toxicity. Remember that your peace is the absolute most expensive thing you will ever own. Never let anyone discount its value and never apologize for fiercely protecting your empire.